It was 8:47 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, December 18th, 2025, when President Donald Trump stepped into the diplomatic reception room of the White House. Networks had cleared their primetime schedules. Millions of Americans tuned in, expecting presidential reassurance about the economy. What they got instead was perhaps the most comprehensively dishonest presidential address in modern American history. 18 minutes of claims so false, so mathematically impossible, so thoroughly contradicted by Trump's own administration's data that fact checkers would spend the next 48 hours systematically dismantling every major assertion. The first bombshell came early when Trump declared, "Already, I've secured a record-breaking $18 trillion of investment into the United States." The number rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. $18 trillion represented roughly 3/4 of America's entire annual GDP. There was just one problem. It wasn't true. CNN's Daniel Dale immediately pulled up the White House's own investment tracking webpage. The number listed there? $9.6 trillion. Not $18 trillion. Trump had just doubled his own administration's figures on live television, but even the 9.6 trillion figure was deeply misleading. Bloomberg Economics had analyzed those claimed investments weeks earlier. Their conclusion was damning. Only about $7 trillion could be characterized as real investment pledges. The remaining $2.6 trillion consisted of what analysts called amorphous promises, vague trade frameworks, and future purchase agreements. The two largest line items were commitments from UAE and Qatar, $1.4 trillion from UAE and $1.2 trillion from Qatar. These numbers weren't just ambitious, they were economically absurd. UAE's entire GDP in 2024 was $537 billion. Their pledge represented nearly 3 years of their country's total economic output. And everything else is falling rapidly, Trump declared, referring to grocery prices. The claim sounded reassuring, but the Consumer Price Index data told a completely different story. September 2025, data showed average grocery prices were up 2.7% from September 2024, up 1.4% since Trump's inauguration. Grocery prices weren't falling rapidly. They were rising steadily. The November data, released the next morning, confirmed. Grocery prices were up 1.9% year over year. The president was telling Americans their personal experience of rising food costs was imaginary. Trump's specific claim about eggs required significant context. The price of eggs is down 82% since March, he announced triumphantly. This was technically true, but deliberately misleading. Egg prices had spiked dramatically in early 2025 due to avian flu outbreaks. March 2025 represented an abnormal peak driven by temporary supply disruptions. By cherry-picking the highest point in a temporary spike, Trump made a return to normal market conditions sound like presidential achievement. It was like claiming credit for the sun rising after a storm passed. The mathematical impossibilities reached their peak when Trump turned to prescription an executive order I issued will slash drug prices by 200%, 300%, 400%, 500%, 600%, 700%, 800%, Trump declared. The claim was so absurd that even viewers without economics degrees could recognize the problem. A 100% reduction means the item becomes free. Anything beyond 100% is mathematically nonsensical. You cannot reduce a price by 600%. The concept is incoherent. It would require pharmaceutical companies to pay patients to take medications, then pay them again and again. Later in the speech, he upped the figure to 900%. CNN's fact check, published within an hour, was devastating. Nobody has heard of such reductions because they are mathematically impossible. This wasn't a mistake or slip of the tongue. This was a prepared speech, reviewed by multiple staff members, delivered from a teleprompter in a formal White House address. Someone had written 600% price reductions. Someone had approved that language. Someone had decided that claiming the impossible was acceptable if it sounded impressive enough. Trump declared that when he took office, inflation was the worst in 48 years, or all time. But actual data contradicted him. The inflation rate in December 2024, Biden's last full month, was 2.9%. In January 2025, Trump's inauguration month, it was 3.0%. These numbers were nowhere near the worst in 48 years. Trump was claiming credit for inheriting an inflation crisis that had already largely resolved itself. Then, Trump made an even bolder claim. Inflation is stopped. This was simply false. The November 2025 inflation rate came in at 2.7%, still representing ongoing price increases. Inflation hadn't stopped. It had slowed. The price of a Thanksgiving turkey was down 33% compared to Biden last year, Trump announced. The actual data from the Wells Fargo Agri-Foods Institute showed turkey prices had declined by 3.7% for national brands, not 33%. Trump had exaggerated the decrease by a factor of nearly 9. Even the overall Thanksgiving meal cost had fallen by only 2% to 3%. Trump had taken a modest price decrease and inflated it into a supposed miracle. Within an hour of the speech concluding, CNN had published a comprehensive fact check identifying false or misleading claims in nearly every major assertion. NBC News deployed 3 reporters to analyze different aspects. PolitiFact launched a detailed investigation that would culminate in a false rating. FactCheck.org published rapid-fire analysis, picking apart 8 key claims. The Associated Press, Bloomberg News, and Reuters all published fact checks. Even Fox News ran segments questioning some of his more extreme claims. The Wall Street Journal noted that the president's figures require significant context and in some cases correction. What made this fact-checking response particularly significant was its unanimity. This wasn't conservative and liberal outlets disagreeing about interpretation. This was mainstream media, business press, nonpartisan fact-checkers, and even right-leaning publications all arriving at the same conclusion. Trump's claims were false and demonstrably so. The contradictions weren't subtle policy disagreements. They were mathematical impossibilities and direct conflicts with the administration's own published data. Trump's approval rating on the economy had already hit a new low of 36%, according to the most recent NPR PBS News Marist poll before the speech. The poll found that 45% cited prices as their primary worry. 2/3 expressed concern about tariffs' impact on their finances. The speech was supposed to ease those concerns. Instead, it reinforced the perception that Trump was disconnected from economic reality, more interested in claiming imaginary victories than acknowledging genuine challenges. Senator Elizabeth Warren released a statement within hours. The president stood before the American people and lied about the economy they're living in. He told families struggling with grocery bills that prices are falling when they're rising. He claimed impossible drug price reductions. He invented investment figures his own administration contradicts. Representative Brendan Boyle was more direct. I've never seen a presidential address contain this density of false claims about basic economic facts. But the most damaging criticism came from unexpected sources. Larry Kudlow, Trump's former National Economic Council director and frequent defender, appeared on Fox Business the next morning and acknowledged some of the numbers the president cited last night don't match what we're seeing in official data. The $18 trillion figure is difficult to verify. When even friendly economic advisors start questioning your numbers, the credibility crisis becomes impossible to ignore. Presidential addresses are supposed to be moments of national unity, opportunities for the commander-in-chief to speak directly to Americans with honesty and authority. When a president uses that platform to systematically mislead the public about fundamental economic realities, it erodes trust not just in that individual, but in the institution of the presidency itself. Americans watching the speech faced an impossible choice: believe their president or believe their own experience of rising grocery prices, their own understanding of basic mathematics, their own ability to verify claims against readily available data. For millions of Americans, the speech became a defining moment in their relationship with Trump's presidency. Those who already distrusted him saw confirmation of their worst suspicions. A president willing to say anything, no matter how false, if he believed it would benefit him politically. Those who had supported Trump while harboring doubts found those doubts harder to dismiss when confronted with such obvious, verifiable falsehoods. Even some of his most loyal supporters struggled to reconcile the president's claims with their own financial reality. The fact-checking operations that dismantled Trump's speech represented journalism at its most essential. In an era of information overload and partisan echo chambers, the systematic verification of presidential claims serves a crucial democratic function. When powerful figures lie, someone must document the truth. When leaders manipulate data, someone must present accurate numbers. The speed and comprehensiveness of the fact-checking response demonstrated that despite all challenges facing American journalism, this watchdog function remained viable. By the weekend following the speech, even some conservative media outlets had begun questioning Trump's economic messaging. The Wall Street Journal's editorial board, while supporting many of Trump's policies, published a piece titled "The President's Credibility Gap on Economics," noting, exaggeration is a political constant, but President Trump's recent claims about investment figures and price trends venture beyond spin into territory that undermines his administration's genuine economic achievements. It was a remarkable rebuke from a newspaper that had endorsed Trump and generally supported his economic agenda. The speech would be studied in journalism schools and political science courses as a case study in presidential dishonesty and the fact-checking response it triggered. Communication professors would use it to teach students about the importance of verifying claims against source material. Ethics courses would examine it as an example of the tension between political messaging and factual accuracy. And Americans would remember it as the night their president looked them in the eye and lied about the economy they were living through, confident that repetition and performance could override reality itself. In 18 minutes, Trump had undermined his own credibility, contradicted his administration's data, made mathematically impossible claims, and demonstrated a relationship with truth that alarmed even some of his supporters. The fact-checkers had exposed every major falsehood, but the damage to public trust in presidential communication would take far longer to repair. Sometimes the most revealing moments in politics aren't what leaders say, but what they're willing to lie about, and how boldly they're willing to do it.